I've done some reading about the Kamala bailout fund thing for BLM protesters. Naturally, it is so much more underwhelming than I ever thought it would be. God, I didn't actually know that it was only Kamala Harris and the BLM bail fund. It's quite interesting to see just how weird the reaction is to this very sudden change in presidential candidate, because I think it's pretty unprecedented that an American presidential candidate drops out 4 or 5 months before the election and then their vice president takes over, because as people like Trump have actually complained about, is all the time that they've invested in attacking Biden, they have to basically go back to the drawing board and start again with not that much time left. Which is, again, like, the party can do what they want. The party can choose whatever candidate they want, and it's logical that Kamala would be the next one in line after Biden turned out to be not very fit for the job because she's the vice president. It would look kind of weird if you skipped over your vice president for someone else. Seems like basically everyone in the party is okay with it, though. There hasn't been that much uproar. The only uproar I've seen against Kamala being just kind of like taking over from Biden that quickly is Republicans, because now they want to say like, oh, it's undemocratic, it's a coup. Like, okay, whatever. But the funny thing is that the attacks on Kamala have been very improvised. Like, because it's funny watching a party that is just trying to get its attack lines together, and there's a little gap now because they haven't really figured out which party line is the most effective against her. With Biden, it was obviously his age and his senility, so everyone basically, they see it trending, they get the marching orders, they know where to look for clips and things like that. Like, that's very easy, right? For Kamala, they don't actually know. They're just throwing things at the wall, which, you know, has resulted in some very funny lines of attack. They've already had to urge their colleagues to stop being racist and sexist towards her, because people are talking about how she doesn't have any biological children, even though she's like, I think she's an adoptive parent. They're having to talk about how she's like a DEI hire, and actually her her real name is what was the real name that they gave her? They've tried to say that she's like a DEI hire and her real name is fucking Hawk Tua or whatever. Like, it's so stupid. But they're starting to settle on a few things. They're starting to settle. The Borders are thing, Kamala, yeah. The Borders are thing is coming up a little bit because they're associating her with the failures at the border, even though the Democrats have famously tried to push a border bill through that would have restricted the number of people coming through the border, would have actually allowed for border closures if a certain cap of 5,000 people was reached, and only reopening it once the number was way lower. The Republicans obviously shot it down. Trump admitted to shooting it down because he wanted to leave something to have to use as on the campaign trail. If the Democrats put forward bipartisan legislation that helps temper the immigration problem, Republicans have nothing to fight over. They were willing to actually let the border issue go on to benefit them in the election campaign. That's who the Republican Party, that's who they are, okay? They don't give a fuck. But they're starting to settle on a few things. They're starting to settle on this, ironically, two arguments. One which used to come from the left, which is that she was apparently a very aggressive prosecutor who got loads of people jailed for smoking weed and shit like that. But again, it's not actually true. The number of convictions for smoking weed actually went down under Harris. She actually did deliberately, she specifically told people not to put people in jail if all they've done is possess marijuana. I think there were maybe 60 people who went to jail with marijuana charges, but they don't even say whether or not they had any other charges. So we just don't know. But it was far less than her predecessor. But it's ironic that they're trying to use the Kamala claim that used to come from the left, but they're also trying to simultaneously say that she is far too liberal on policing, that she supports defund the police, which she's never said, and also that she is soft on crime. The example that is used most recently is the BLM bail fund. It's this accusation that she helped violent BLM protesters by supporting their bail funds. This is from Tom Cotton, who I think is a Republican senator from Arkansas. Kamala Harris helped violent rioters in Minnesota get out of jail to do more damage. Keep do more damage in mind, okay? Don't believe her when she says she condemns the violence. Look at her record, not the words. Okay, strong claim. And Trump, obviously, has gone even further by saying that there was a criminal who was bailed out with Kamala Harris's help and set free, and once he was set free on bail, he went on to murder a man on a train platform in St. Paul, Minnesota, shooting him 6 times. So, that's a tall claim. It's gone even further. CBS have basically said that Trump is falsely accusing her of donating to the Minnesota Freedom Fund, bailing out dangerous criminals. James Lindsay says Marxists always lie because look, here's a tweet of her mentioning the bail fund. Well, okay, what's going on here? Ooh. So, what happened? First of all, this tweet from Kamala Harris, which is still public, like her tweet is still there. She hasn't deleted it or anything. They've not tried to hide it. First of all, she didn't donate to this fund. She tweeted about it and suggested other people donate to it. There's no evidence that she's ever donated to this fund ever. So that's already, like, to say that she donated would be false. But what happened here? Well, this is from 2020, June. If you remember, the summer of 2020, this when George Floyd was killed by a Minneapolis cop. So after George Floyd was killed, there were protests. And a bunch of those protesters got arrested. So people typically in America make complaints, if you're more progressive, about Minnesota, about bail funds being a little bit unfair, right? People will say that these things are a bit unfair because bail is basically means that once you've been arrested and charged, you can pay, if the judge finds you eligible, to stay out of jail until your trial. Naturally, people who are poorer, people who are by extension, people who are ethnic minorities are less likely to have this privilege, so they just stay in jail even if the judge considers them not a threat, that they can actually be out of jail until their trial, like innocent until proven guilty. So it's seen as a bit of an injustice. So Kamala basically puts this tweet out, but gets 4,500 likes, like a little fundraiser, basically. Not donating herself, but fundraising. Okay, so she contributed to these guys getting a lot of money. How much she contributed is a bit difficult to say. She definitely contributed a bit, because in a standard year, these guys were only getting about $100,000. After the George Floyd protest, it raised about $35 million. Now, this was partially because of Kamala. This was also just because there were people protesting and people getting arrested, and the treatment of protesters by the cops was publicized quite a lot. Because when it comes to rioting, and this is something that I learned very early on because of the London riots in 2011, when there's a riot, the response from the authorities is typically, even in quite liberal societies, is to set an example, to make an example out of the protesters by giving sometimes quite disproportionate sentences. In the London riots, some people faced months or even up to a year in jail for crimes as trivial as like stealing biscuits, or someone stole a violin from a music shop and had to do like over a year in jail. Like, yeah, these were kind of like the stories that came out, because the idea is that the disproportionate sentencing is supposed to deter people from rioting in the future. It's to keep people away from, to discourage mob mentality and shit like that, right? So, in protest of the cash bail system, at least, Kamala fundraises for this fund with one tweet, okay? That gets 4,500 likes. That's her contribution. The idea that this helped violent rioters in Minnesota get out of jail to do more damage, well, you can probably verify or disprove that if you want to, because in the protest she's talking about, if you look at the tweet, she's specifically referencing protesters. Only 170 people were arrested. It's not that many. You can go through them. Within the first week, 167 of them were already released. Very few of them were charged. Only 10 of them actually ended up having to pay bail. So whether or not they even needed the funding for this is quite questionable. They probably needed funding for one person, as we'll find out. So 167 were released within a week. Majority of them don't even get charges. Only 10 of them have to pay bail. Most of these bail charges are about $100, sometimes even less. 2 of them, however, were charged with actually crimes that are more serious. One person was charged with attempted murder because he shot at the cops, and his bail fund was $75,000. The second person was charged for looting a liquor store, a clothing store, and a mobile store. She paid $750 through this organization. There's no evidence that either of these 2 people, let alone anyone else, committed other crimes whilst they were on bail. There's no evidence for it. So the idea that Kamala helped these people to go on and commit more crimes is just not true. Also, not to mention, even if it were, let's say this guy, the guy who actually shot at the cops, got out of jail and started shooting at people again, whose fault would that be? Would it be Kamala Harris's fault? Well, not really. I'll tell you why. It definitely wouldn't be the fault of these people. It would be the fault of the judge. Because ultimately, regardless of how much money you have, it is up to the judge to decide whether or not you are eligible for bail. And even then, it might not even be the judge's fault, because sometimes a judge can have very good reason to think someone is eligible for bail. Like, they might have a good enough assessment to show this person is not likely to commit crimes if they're on bail and let them out, but they could be wrong in that risk assessment. That's it. Like, that can happen, because mistakes happen in the justice system all the time. Some people serve sentences way longer than even what their original ones. Some people go to jail for 50 years and they come out and they do more crimes. That's not necessarily the fault of the justice system. That's just like, the alternative to it is just keeping people in for way longer than they're supposed to. That's the alternative, right? Like, there's no perfect way. There's always going to be people who reoffend. Always. So even if we take these guys at their word, like this is nothing. This is a nothing statement. This is often used in arguments, and Rob Norb did this to me as well. It's used to service the argument that Kamala supports rioting. Well, first of all, giving people cash bail is not supporting rioting. You understand that, right? Because not everyone who's arrested was rioting. Most of these people were not charged, because in riots, some people who are just caught up in the madness and don't even do anything get arrested. That happens. That also happened, I think, on January 6th, right? So it's not support of rioting because, believe it or not, if you've got bail funds, you still have to face criminal charges. You understand that, right? Like, you can get your bail, but you still have to turn up in court. You still have to make your case, and you still might be found guilty and even put in jail. So it's just such a red herring. And then the worst of it comes from Trump. The worst of it comes because in 2022, the story that Trump referenced about the guy who actually did commit a murder after he was given bail, this happened 2 years after the event. He was given bail by the organization, by the Freedom Fund, $2,000. But again, obviously, a judge decided that this guy was eligible for bail. So apparently he was acquitted. Stallings. Oh, this person. I didn't know that. Funny that. Okay. So Tillman is arrested for indecent exposure, first of all. He gets bail support, $2,000, and then he's released, and then he goes on to get charged with second-degree murder. It seems like he did it. Seems quite likely that he did it. So what does this have to do with Kamala Harris, though? What does this have to do with even the bail fund? At the end of the day, one person had ultimate discretion over whether or not this person was eligible for bail, and it was the judge. This has nothing to do with Kamala Harris supporting like a murderer, or even the tweets to do with protesters in one tweet. But yeah, that's one claim that they're going to do, because again, this is the Republican method. I've noticed it now. The Republican method is just, it doesn't have to be a logical argument. It doesn't have to have any kind of like A to B to C point evidence evaluation. It doesn't need any of that. It's just something that sounds good. Oh, Kamala supported this organization in 2020 with one tweet for a bail fund, which, by the way, opposition to bail funds is pretty bipartisan. It's mostly left-leaning people who oppose them, but the right-wingers, some of them oppose it as well. Republicans oppose it in some parts. The mainstream Democratic Party thinks they should be removed. That was the Biden and Harris platform, was to suggest removing bail funds, because this idea that a judge can find two people equally eligible for bail, but only one of them gets it because they have money. Like, what? That doesn't make any sense. It's so stupid. Chris Christie, a Republican governor, agreed with this. They replaced the bail system in New Jersey with a points-based system based on risk assessment. And did you know that people who were released under the points-based system were no more likely to commit crimes whilst awaiting their trials? So yeah, the bail fund is just completely unnecessary. It's unfair and it's unnecessary. So the fact that Kamala does this, but it goes to one organization that helped the bail of one person who ultimately went on to commit a crime after getting released, well, that means that Kamala Harris supports a murderer and also supports a violent insurrectionist riot. Like, come on. None of these points like lead from one to the other, but they're all just kind of associated in the same kind of like loose bundle. And that's your talking point, again, for the week. Doesn't matter how easy it is to debunk. Doesn't matter how illogical it is. It just sounds nice, right? It just sounds like a good talking point. So they use it. Cringe. Compared to last week, they are at least pulling some cases together. So, yeah. Simultaneously, then, we have the overzealous prosecutor who jails people for smoking weed, which the right-wingers are using as well. Obviously, libertarians support Trump, so they like that argument. But at the same time, she also supports criminals.